triggerwarning.tv and my own website.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Welcome. I have no idea how long this particular program is going to last, but I think it'll be an hour at least anyway. Welcome to it. MPs have just finished debating whether to ask the European Union for a delay to Article 50 ahead of a vote later on. But before that vote later on, they have just begun voting on 4 amendments to that vote. And I'm going to tell you about those now in a second. All right, we learned today that the Prime Minister Theresa May will make a third attempt to get her deal through Parliament next week. That's also the basis of one of the amendments. Again, I'll tell you more about that in a minute. It's Thursday's Richie Allen Show, and you're welcome to it. Yeah, so they've been debating all day about asking for an extension to Article 50. This is the day after that MPs voted to take no deal off the table and out of the hands of the UK negotiators, even though that vote is symbolic only because the UK is scheduled by law to leave the European Union on March 29th anyway. That's the default position. A lot of people are very confused by this, not because they're stupid or because they're dumb, but I think the UK commercial and national media is doing its level best to keep people fairly in the dark about what's really happening here. So ahead of the vote tonight on whether to ask for a delay, John Bercow, the Speaker, selected 4 proposed amendments because MPs, you see, get to propose amendments to any particular vote. There were quite a few amendments proposed. He got to choose which ones went forward and which didn't. So he chose 4, and they have begun voting on those 4 amendments right now. The first one they are voting on is a very important one. It's an amendment proposed by the MP Sarah Wollaston, former, of course, Tory Member of Parliament, but she broke away to join this independent group of MPs. Now, her motion proposes that Article 50 is extended, but in order to hold a second referendum. So they're voting on that right now, and we'll have it live in around about 10 minutes' time when the result is announced. It's felt that this amendment will lose because the Labour Party... This is very confusing for people. The Labour Party has changed its policy towards a second referendum, and it now is endorsing a second referendum. But this afternoon, despite Labour changing its stance on Brexit and despite it announcing in the last week or so that it favours a second referendum, Labour is in fact telling its MPs not to vote with Sarah Wollaston, not to vote for that amendment today. Labour is saying today it's a little bit too soon to be voting for a second referendum. It remains to be seen whether Labour MPs will obey the whip and abstain. 1 or 2 of them have gone public to say they will vote with Sarah Wollaston. So that's the first of 4 votes that's taken place right now at Westminster. So it's been a couple of crazy days. The mainstream media is loving it. It's lapping it up. It's beautifully theatrical for them. And the talking heads are out in force from the newspapers, from academia, you know, I suppose kind of rubber stamping for the audience anyway, just how important, just how pivotal this is. It is important. So let's talk about the amendments. So they're voting right now on the Sarah Wollaston amendment. That is to delay Article 50 so that there can be a second referendum, right? Okay? The original vote, which will take place later or might not depending on the results of the amendments, the original vote is to ask MPs Brussels to allow a delay in Article 50. That's the main vote. An amendment to that is Sarah Wollaston saying a delay for a second referendum. I think you can follow it. I'm an ordinary bloke, me, and I generally can explain things in ordinary terms for people. So the amendments, Wollaston now, there will be a vote then after that, maybe, on MPs taking control of the process. This is an amendment tabled by Labour MP Hilary Benn, right? So this is a cross-party amendment, and it would allow members of Parliament to take control of the process on Wednesday, March 20th, to force a series of indicative votes to establish MPs' preferred option for Brexit. This is very interesting. This amendment would mean that MPs take over the process of sorting out Brexit, take it away from the government, and then they would have a series of votes themselves to decide which is the way forward. That's a Hilary Benn amendment. Chris Bryant is a Labour MP, and he's tabled an amendment to block a vote on May's deal for a third time. So that's an amendment which will take place in the next hour or so. Bryant saying, why should May be allowed to come back for a third time to try and get a deal through which has been already rejected twice by parliamentarians? Bryant is citing all sorts of historical parliamentary precedent going back hundreds of years. He says it's frankly against the rules of Parliament for May to be allowed to come back again with that deal. And then the Labour Party has an amendment about consensus. Let me give you more on that. That's the fourth amendment today. It's in the name of Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer, Valerie Vaz, Emily Thornberry, John McDonnell and Nick Brown. This amendment rejects the Prime Minister's deal, rejects no deal, seeks an extension of Article 50 to avoid no deal on the 29th of March and to allow the Commons to provide parliamentary time to find a majority for a different approach. So that's Amendment 4. Now you have to bear in mind, dear listener, this is a live radio programme in Manchester, presented, produced and edited by me. I don't have any producers. There isn't anybody in the back room updating me, so I'm flying by the seat of my pants here. All right? So just to let you know, right now, particularly for our listeners overseas, they are voting on Sarah Wollaston's amendment, which is to request basically a second referendum, that there would be a delay in Article 50, an extension in order to hold a second referendum. It isn't expected she will succeed with that because Labour has told its MPs it's probably a bit early to be winding the public up by talking about a second referendum, so let's hold off on that. But there will be a result on that now in the next couple of minutes or so. I've got to keep an eye on it. I'm watching several screens and I've got my playout system here because I've got some audio to play for you as well. John Bercow, the Speaker, is a stooge and is showing his Remain bias, and it's clear for everybody to see, because I told you that he gets to choose which amendments are tabled before the vote on the main vote, which I said is whether we should ask the European Union for an extension to Article 50. That's Theresa May's vote tonight, right? May, having lost, said, OK, we'll have a vote now on whether to go to Brussels and ask for an extension. That's the main vote. Now they're voting on amendments. John Bercow got to choose the amendments out of a number of amendments. And one of the amendments he would not take earlier this morning was one which would have ruled out a second referendum. That was Amendment B, proposed by Brexiteers. They wanted an amendment to be voted on right now, that would rule out a second referendum. There was murders in Parliament today when Bercow wouldn't take this particular amendment. Here's the Conservative MP and Brexiteer Mark Francois asking Bercow, why wouldn't you accept this amendment? Have a listen carefully.
Mr. Speaker, I express some disappointment that you have chosen not to select Amendment B, which had the support of 127 members of this House, including the entirety of the DUP, 13 members of the Labour Party one independent to boot, and the rest being Conservative members. It therefore had far more signatures than any other amendment on the order paper. And it had 3 different parties supporting it. But you often said that you look at whether or not the House wants to decide a question, then you look at the number of colleagues who signed an amendment, and then you look at the breadth. So 127, cross-party, and the House clearly wants to decide it. So can I ask for clarification?
It's a brilliant question. Of all the amendments that were proposed, the one to take away the possibility of a second referendum had the most support, but Bercow, the Speaker of the House, John Bercow, who gets to decide these things, threw that one out and said no. Good question. Why? What did Bercow say?
It is not uncommon for a member of this House to be mightily pleased when his or her amendment is selected, and notably displeased when it is not. I hope the right honourable gentleman, who is an extremely experienced member of this House, whom I greatly respect, will understand when I say that members do have to take the rough with the smooth.
Right. So you've got to take the rough with the smooth. Members are happy when their amendments are selected and unhappy when they're not. You have to take the rough with the smooth. Now, I was incredulous watching this. You might say you're very naive, Rich. I'm not naive. I think I know. I can't say I know because you can't be that arrogant. I think I know what's going on. You know, I'm talking about overall what's going on. So I was incredulous. Francois had asked him, our amendment had greatest support across 3 parties, but you said numbers are important in the past when you came to choose the amendments. So what's going on? Did Bercow elaborate?
Today he is disappointed that his amendment, or that of others, but which he supports, has not been chosen. He's perfectly right to say that numbers are a factor, and he simply repeats what is a matter of fact, the range of parties from which its signatories are drawn. The chair has to make a judgment on a variety of criteria. Numbers are not the only factor. Breadth of support is a factor. This place works on the assumption that the chair does his or her best to facilitate debate and to allow the House to speak. I have tried to make a fair judgment with a range of different points being canvassed and the opportunity for the House to decide upon them.
It's incredible that this place works upon the assumption that I am fair and balanced. That's the crux of what Bercow said there. In other words, I get to do whatever I want to do. It's assumed that I will always be impartial and fair. Here we go, the results of the Wollaston Amendment.
The ayes to the right, 85.
Okay.
And the noes to the left, 334.
Right, so that was absolutely hammered. That was Sarah Wollaston's amendment that Article 50 be extended in order to hold a second referendum. 85 in favour, 334 not in favour. Loads abstained. So that's failed that. It was kind of expected that would fail, right?
Amendment I.
Right.
Mr. Hilary Benn to move the amendment formally. Move formally? Formally.
So this is interesting now. This is the Hilary Benn amendment. And the Hilary Benn amendment is the amendment that ultimately would mean that members of Parliament would take control of the process of leaving the European Union. So just to repeat, Sarah Wollaston, independent, having left the Conservative Party, proposed an amendment that Article 50 be extended in order to hold a second referendum. Labour whipped its MPs not to vote with that. Incredibly, even though Labour is in favour of a second referendum. So it was defeated by 334 to 85. Now they're off to vote on the Benn amendment, and that should take another 5, 10, well, more likely 10, 12 minutes before we get the result of that. That's a very important one as well. That's going to be a lot closer than the Wollaston amendment, right? 17, nearly 18 minutes past the hour. Let's move on. It's Brexit today. It's a Brexit special. It annoys people. Brexit. Yeah, we've come to say Brexit, some of us. And we should say Brexit, shouldn't we? Brexit. By the way, John Bercow voted Remain. He told students this back in 2017. It's a stitch up. Yeah. There is an assumption in this place that I and my predecessors always act fairly and with impartiality. So piss off, in other words, right? I don't have to give you any reasons. So there you are. The walls are crumbling down, dear listener. We can see it. It's not a surprise to us, but it's interesting to observe the way in which it's happening, the machinations of it, how it's all happening. Very interesting news to bring you. You might know this, you might not. Donald Tusk, the European Council president, is now saying that a 4-year extension to Article 50 might be a good idea. I'm not making this up. You see, they don't want a short extension of a few weeks. They want a long extension, and they want European Parliament elections to take place in this country in May. And former UKIP leader Nigel Farage has been saying to his friends privately, don't ask me how I know this, privately, that he expects to be campaigning to become again an MEP in the next few weeks. This is the greatest stitch up of all time. Now, have a listen to this. Amazing scenes on Sky News today. Conservative political consultant Ed Rennie. Actually, let me just bring you a little bit of breaking news. The Hillary Benn amendment isn't next. There's been an amendment to the amendment. This is the mad shite that I used to do back in my commercial radio days, explaining this stuff to people. So the Hillary Benn amendment, proposing that MPs take back control of the process, there's been an amendment proposed to that. And that proposal is to extend Article 50 till the end of June to find the way forward with the majority of support. So that's happening now. An amendment to the Hillary Benn amendment. Do you know what I said to you at the top of the programme? Might be here for an hour. You might be here for more than that. Could be here all night the way things are going. 21 minutes past 5. It is here in the UK. Loads of discussion on this. So back to what I was telling you anyway. You think Jeff Stelling is good? My arse. Stelling has got dozens of producers and somebody telling him what to say next in his ear. It's just me and you today, dear listener, I'm telling you. Amazing scenes on Sky News today. Conservative political consultant Ed Rennie was on with Kay Burley. And Ed Rennie, very well-known political consultant, said that Ollie Robbins, now you might not have heard of Ollie Robbins, he said Ollie Robbins, who, by the way, was appointed as Theresa May's chief Brexit negotiator after the last election, and that is his post today, okay? So Ollie Robbins today, the official title is Europe Advisor to the Prime Minister, but in reality, he's the government's chief Brexit negotiator. Ed Rennie, speaking on Sky News this afternoon with Kay Burley, basically talked about Ollie Robbins, the chief negotiator. Wait till you hear what Ed Rennie said. Massive conspiracy here. There really is. And Kay Burley didn't want to touch it. Neither did anybody else on Sky today. Ed Rennie, political consultant, talking about the UK's chief Brexit negotiator, Ollie Robbins, the man in that job today. Have a listen.
Well, the critical point is, of course, is when the exit poll came in at the general election, suddenly there was no majority of people willing to play out in Parliament the strategy of, if you don't give us a decent deal, we will walk away and go to WTO rules, and obviously trying to agree some temporary measures based on Article 24 or something similar. Now, once that was actually the moment that a WTO Brexit, the walking away with no deal option, was taken away. We can look back and say that with almost certainty now. The problem with that is that you cannot negotiate a good deal. And so Michel Barnier, who said, my mission will be to make any Brexit withdrawal as tough as possible so the British will want to stay in the EU, he considers his job. And after the general election, Theresa May went to Ollie Robbins, having got rid of Nick Timothy, who unwisely wrote
all these
her
names
manifesto.
mean nothing to our viewers.
Sorry, so Ollie Robbins was the chief negotiator for the PM after the general election. And he basically worked with Michel Barnier to give us the worst possible deal. And that is what we've got. We've got the worst possible withdrawal because the one reason it's really worse than being a member of the EU is it's even more difficult to leave the withdrawal agreement and the backstop protocol than it is perhaps even to leave the EU itself.
Now, promise, believe me when I tell you, Kay Burley didn't follow up on that. She didn't. In fact, the next voice you would have heard was from another political commentator standing next to Ed Rennie. Burley, and this is the worst dereliction of duty I've seen in recent weeks by a presenter on national television. This guy, who's a very credible political commentator and political consultant, said effectively that Theresa May's appointment after the last general election, okay, Ollie Robbins, the man who became the chief Brexit negotiator, like people like David Davis would have worked under him, all right, you understand? That basically he was working